제가 결혼하기 전에 입양기관에서 잠깐 일을 했어요. 그거는 입양에 대해서 그다지 제가 무슨 뭐가 있는 게 아니라 석사학위로 끝나고 그 당시에 소셜워커들에게 지금 얼굴을 제일 많이 주는 건 그냥 입양기관이었어요. 그래서 결혼해서 애를 낳기 전에 잠깐 입양기관에서 일을 했었습니다. 실패해서.
And I'm just gonna fast forward a few years into after college, after I received my social work degree and my license, I worked at an adoption agency. I worked at Holt. And the reason why I worked at Holt was social work came natural to me, and taking a degree in that field was just so easy. And after my master's, the first job I chose was the job that paid the most in the social work field, which happened to be an international adoption agency. Because that was probably the only place in Korea at that time that actually did any kind of international exchange.
그때는 제가 애 자식들도 낳지도 않았을 때고 그래서 그 입양인들을 가면서 그렇게 뭔가 생각을 많이 하지 못했던 것 같아요. 그냥 부모가 키울 수 없으니까 가나보다. 우리 고아원에 있었던 애들하고 뭐 똑같은 애들인가 보다. 그 정도의 생각으로 깊은 생각이 없이 일을 했던 것 같아요.
When I started working for Holt, I was in my mid-20s, and as still, I wasn't a mother at that time. When I started working for Holt, I haven't had my first child, and I was, in Korean we call that a lady, an unmarried, sort of unmarried. At that time, I didn't really put in a deep thought for any of the children that I sent abroad. I thought of that matter, that case as a very simplistic matter. The birth family could not take care of the child needed a family, and it was my job to just pick up the child from the hospital, take them to the adoption agency, and then create the file work and send them abroad. That's my job, just pick up, send, pick up, send. And I never really thought about that entire process in a deeper perspective.
그때는 아이들에 대해서는 별로 깊이 생각을 못했어요. 그렇게 고아원에 있는 것보다 가는 게 낫겠다 이렇게 생각을 했던 거고, 그 입양 미혼모들이 힘들고 고통스러운 것들을 상담해 주는 것에 더 많은 시간을 보냈던 것 같아요.
And personally, because I grew up in an orphanage, I know what the lives of many of these children could be had they remained in Korea. So my duty to send these children abroad seemed like a better option than anything else from my personal knowledge and my experience as a child living in the orphanage. And so what I decided to do as a social worker, and I'd say many social workers do have a good heart, I decided to channel my energy into communicating and healing the hearts of the single mothers more than the children. Obviously, you can't communicate with the people. So I focused a lot of my energy and my passion into consulting and communicating with the single mothers.
제가 인테이크에 상담을 해서 그럴 때 제가 여러분들한테 가장 미안한 건 그때 더 많은 정보를 내가 쓰지 않았을까. 왜 많은 것들을 기록을 놨었어야 되는데 돌아올 거라는 생각은 전혀 못했던 것 같아요.
There's one thing that I am deeply apologetic to the entire international agreement about the community today is, like I said, I told you I focused a lot of my energy into communicating with single mothers because it was my job as an intaker to receive their signature, ask them very basic questions about what the story was as to this child being given up or relinquished in this manner. But if I had only asked them another question, maybe a few more questions as to what their emotions were, or what the real true consequences of circumstances were for them to relinquish their child, the adoptees coming back today would probably see a little more information on their adoptees. And if there's one thing that I regret today as the president of InKAS, looking back into my 20s, I regret that I haven't asked maybe another question about the dad, or about the grandparents, or the aunts, or the cousins, or any of these extra questions that adoptees tend to have that's not written in their files, and that can be never told sometimes.
여러분들이 이해해 주면 하는 게 그때는 우리나라 사람들의 생각이 수순이 그거밖에 되지 않았다는 것을 이해해 주셨으면 좋겠어요.
And I mean, this not only goes to you, but if I have a chance, I probably want to communicate with communicate this thought to the rest of the Korean adoptive community. But at that time, so I'd say 80s, 70s, and 60s, our social understanding or the social intellect, level of intellect of what Korea was at that time was post-Korean War. And we were sort of, the entire country was living in desperation and out of desperation. It wasn't our first cue sign to ask about these intrinsic questions as to why you give your child up. Obviously, you'll give up your child because you don't have food, like my other neighbor and the neighbor who's living in front of me. So for for many adoptees who are have that sort of anger towards all the files you have and the missing reports, etc., she hopes to deliver the message that Korea at that time just didn't thrive in that kind of comfort to understand someone else's pain and problem at that level. If that makes sense. Yeah, I hope I'm delivering that well.
예, 그리고 결혼해서 그냥 이제는 내가 꿈꾸는 내 자녀, 내 가족만 위한 삶을 살아야겠다 하고 가정에서 생활을 하게 됐어요.
And then after my experience at Holt, I decided to come back to the family, raise my children. So after my 6-7 years of experience at Holt, I left Holt and started a family, and fully dedicated to that and nothing else.
그렇지만 제가 제일 마음이 걸렸던 게 우리 애들을 낳고 나서 우리 고아원에 살던 애들의 그 아픔이나 이런 것들을 결혼한 후에 느끼기 시작했어요.
And like I told you, I had built up a very bitter distaste for all the children that I lived with in the orphanage. But it was only after I had my own children that I actually started to remember and recognize the kind of pain that these kids had or may have had when I interacted with them. And when I was young, I misunderstood that as bullying and hatred and self-destruction. But after having my own children, I began to understand what was underneath the covers of their behaviors and actions.
어느 때 제일 생각이 됐냐면 현관문 들어갔을 때 우리 애들의 신발이 여러 켤레가 있는 것을 보거나 또 아니면 우리 애들이 먹을 과자들이 애들이 먹을 필요가 없을 정도로 많은 것을 볼 때 정말 아이들은 이렇게 커야지 되는데 걔네들은 신발이 빵꾸가 나야지 신발을 하나 얻어 신을 수 있고 간식 시간이 아니면 자기가 먹고 싶은 걸 먹을 수 없었던 것을 기억하면서 정말 마음이 그때 아프고 정말 왜 그때 내가 이렇게 힘들어 했을까 이런 많은 회개를 했습니다.
My biggest regret and sorrow came from witnessing a few things that in my family that happened that I hadn't been able to recognize at the orphanage, which was when I walked in through the door, I saw my children's shoes, and they had their summer parachutes, their spring shoes, winter shoes, boots, all kinds of pairs of bright shoes, dark shoes. And my brother had his own pair of shoes, and I had my own pair of shoes too. And in the kitchen, we had a bunch of snacks. Whenever we want, we just open up the cupboard and we can eat whatever we want. And I began to compare the kind of resources that my children had in comparison to the kind of resources that the kids of orphanage had. They could only afford a new pair of shoes if they no longer had a soul. Or they could only have that snack when a sponsor came and bought cookies for everyone, which usually happens the day before Christmas, or things like that. So once I was able to compare the haves and the have-nots between the kids living in the orphanage and the haves of my own children, I began to feel bad and sorry for the kind of misunderstanding or misinterpretation that I had.
그렇지만 다시 거기로 돌아가고 싶은 생각은 없었어요.
But this didn't mean that I wanted to go back to the orphanage, of course not.
네, 그리고 지나는 동안에 어느 날 1997년이었던 것 같아요. 9월.
September 1997.
그때 제가 교회에서 기도하는 중에 강한 콜링이 오기 시작했어요.
That day I was at church And I was just that very good Christian wife who volunteered at church, did all her chores. But that day at church while I was praying, I received a very, very strong calling, and I couldn't zone it out.
저는 매일 아침 가서 기도를 했는데 그 기도의 제목은 뭐냐면 우리 남편 성공하고 우리 자식들 잘 크고 그거 외에는 기도하는 게 없었어요.
And like I told you, I was a very good Christian wife, and what I did was I would go to church. I would go to the church prayer meetings every single day. That was my job. Wake up in the morning, go to church, pray, come back, cook the meal, take care of the children. And that was my job, and I didn't think of anything beyond that. And all my prayer requests were always the same. Please help my husband make more money. Make sure my children grow up to be great, intelligent people. And all that very secular kind of prayer requests that all humans kind of want and desire on a daily basis.
근데 저는 너무 생각도 못했는데 하나님은 제 마음속으로 입양인들이 한국으로 돌아오는 데 도와라는 콜링이 오기 시작했어요.
In that month of September, for those of you who have that experience, you probably know that sort of an internal revelation came to me, and the message was like this: help the adoptees returning to Korea find their family. And this was like a continuous message that rung inside my head and in my heart over and over and over.
그래서 하나님 그 사람들을 도와줄 이유가 없어요. 너무 좋은 가정에 다 갔어요. 그러니까 도와줄 거 없어요.
So my response back to him was, we don't need to help them. They went to good families and they're living a very good life. I guarantee.
그렇지만 하나님이 계속 저를 터치를 하셨어요.
I was touched over and over with the same message.
너무 화가 났어요.
And I became very, very angry.
하나님 나는 누굴 돕고 싶지 않아요.
And I said, God, the last thing I want to do is help others.
이제 나는 스탑해도 되지 않겠어요?
Wouldn't it be okay for me to stop at my generation? Hasn't this been continuing for so long?
그렇지만 그런 싸움의 연속이 2년 동안 계속됐어요.
And this sort of spiritual battle continued for 2 full years.
또 저희 남편 같은 분은 결혼할 때 하우스와이프로서 하는 것을 가장 선호했던 사람이기 때문에 가정을 벅차고 다른 일을 한다는 걸 생각할 수가 없었어요.
And for my husband, our sort of secret, hidden cultural agreement in our marriage was for me to be a good, faithful housewife and not to start a business or an NGO outside of the family.